and welcome to Cultivating Community, a principal's journey towards an inclusive school, presented by Dr. Amanda Goll. I'm Janelle Mercado, project coordinator, and I'm thrilled to be your moderator for this breakout session. A few logistics to get us started. This session will be recorded and archived on the conference agenda page after the conference for 1 month. Closed captioning is available by clicking the CC button on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. The interpretation icon in the same area will provide access to Spanish translation. We will ensure that ASL interpreters are spotlighted along with the PowerPoint and presentation and our fabulous presenter. Please be sure your volume is muted to avoid background distractions while presenters speak. We encourage you to engage with others in the chat, and when possible, keep your camera on so we can see your beautiful faces. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Amanda Goll, and here we go.
Still good morning. So good morning, good morning. My name is Dr. Amanda Goll, and I am very grateful to be here with you today. So today we're going to get started. I am a principal in the San Mateo-Foster City School District, which is located in the Bay Area. I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes or so. But I wanted to start with how I kind of got here in my principal journey. And I didn't necessarily plan on being a principal. I didn't really know a lot about special education. And I showed up at a campus and I was excited to be here, and I walked down the hallways and I noticed that students were segregated, and students were in places and spaces and they weren't invited to other parts of the campus or into classrooms. And I was really, really confused, and I was really, really sad. But what I am going to do today is talk about where we are now at that journey and how I got here. So with that, I'm going to share my screen. And we'll go ahead and get started. Okay. That's me. And if anyone is wondering, I actually happen to be wearing the same shirt that I was in the photo. One of my colleagues pointed that out to me this morning, not by chance, but if you are wondering, that is true. So 100%, this is something that I am really, really proud of. I think this is pretty awesome. And what do I mean by 100% when I think about Foster City Elementary School? 100% of our students with differences and disabilities and what we would call an SDC classroom are in art, they're in Lego, they're in music, they're in PE, they're in field trips, they're in class parties, they're included in emails. And so in general, I'm really, really proud of this. This is something that took us a little while to get there. We have 18% of our students that move programs and move from case managers every year. So they're not necessarily only staying with one teacher or one program their entire elementary career, but we continue to move students and meet their needs. And over 67% of our students spend more than 75% of their day with their general education peers. So this is exciting. I think it's something to celebrate. But I'm going to have to also let you know that we had to start somewhere, and we're going to continue. We're continuing in this process. We're continuing to make iterations, but we started somewhere, and this is where we started. It was 0%. When I walked onto campus, as I mentioned earlier, students were in the back of campus. It was, oh, do you think that maybe they can come in for music, for example? There were parallel schedules, and children were segregated. So I'm going to back up a little bit and talk to you about my school district. We are located in San Mateo-Foster City. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with this. In the Bay Area, we have over 10,000 students, 50 languages spoken, over 22 schools. It's a very diverse community. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Foster City School. So Foster City School, when I came a couple years ago, there were over 900 students. We've decreased in enrollment. We have about 679 students at this point. We have over 30 languages spoken, and we have about 30 classrooms, TK through 5. We have one K1-2 classroom, which was considered your traditional SEC classroom. And then we have a 3-4-5 classroom as well. And what I also didn't tell you, and it's a fun fact, is that I actually went to Foster City School as a child and somehow ended up being a principal after my studies and my journey. Wasn't necessarily the plan, but here I am today. So I'm very connected and I know a lot about our community. Something that's really important to frame ourselves and understand is that we have a very strong superintendent in Superintendent Ochoa. When he arrived a few years ago, we've created a strategic plan that calls out building blocks, that calls out key strategies. And so when I think about the work with inclusion that we have done over the past several years, I look at it through an equity framework, I look at it through one of our wellness goals, and I look at it through an achievement goal. And we do really have the support of our leaders, which is really, really important when you are moving the needle in this process and driving forward. So a couple takeaways for today. I'm going to talk about emotional intelligence and the connection to school culture. We're going to talk about how to build collaborative teams and some of the things that I've done at my school. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how to create cohesive systems. But we're going to start with emotional intelligence and the connection to school culture. I want to acknowledge that sometimes when people hear emotional intelligence, they sometimes thinks it's the fluff stuff, it's the stuff that makes you feel good. And I would agree with it, that's true. But there's also lots of research that talks about the importance of having emotional intelligence and how that can impact your school culture. But we're gonna listen to this. And I was at a conference a couple weeks ago. I had a great speaker that talked about gratitude, that talked about just really being reflective in the spaces that you are. And so we're going to hear from this educator.
Hello, my name is Matt. I'm a teacher, and today I want to tell you about a sticky note. Years ago, I had this kid who wouldn't speak. And when I say wouldn't speak, I mean not at all, not one word. And I have never felt so ill-equipped as a teacher. Like I had no tools for this situation. So as a way to help connect to that kid, I just drew a cartoon or wrote a little message on a sticky note and put it on their desk every day. And went on like that for the rest of the year. We had parent meetings and counselor meetings and psychologist meetings, and we tried talking to the kid, and just the kid didn't speak all year. 2 years go by and I get an envelope in the mail. I open up and what's inside? A single sticky note. And on it, it said, I saved all your sticky notes. Thank you so much. You helped me more than you know. And that's kind of what's hard about teaching. You never get to know your impact most of the time. You never get to know. But I guarantee you, whatever you're doing, even the small things like a sticky note, they probably have made a huge difference.
I want to say be a sticky note. And I think that for all of us that have chosen to be here the last couple days, that are choosing to do this work, we are being sticky notes. We are making sure that we're having a big impact on the lives of the children and the families and the teachers that we have. I can't really see the chat right now, but if you wanted to either share something about some gratitude for your school, for your community, if you wanted to send a text message to somebody in the name of gratitude, I would encourage you to do that right now. I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it. So when we think about emotional intelligence, I mentioned earlier that some people might call it the fluff stuff. And while that is true and it can make people feel good, it allows you to have some challenging, I'm at work, excuse me, some challenging conversations. There's also a lot of research about what emotional intelligence has on the workplace and how that can impact the people in the spaces that you are working with. And so there's just some data here to support that in terms of what companies are saying about making sure that emotional intelligence is going to be mandatory over the next couple of years. We're in the business of people. We engage with people every day. We engage with young people, we engage with adults, and it's really important to make sure that we understand the impact that we can have in the communications that we have with people every day. And so what I'm going to offer you now is a way to think about emotional intelligence with a framework in perhaps a different way than you thought of it before. Some of you might be familiar with Daniel Goleman's work with emotional intelligence, but he really talks about it in 4 different domains. The 4 domains being self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. The thing about emotional intelligence and learning and talking with people is it's like a muscle. You can get better at it. I can think back to meetings I've had where I've left a meeting and I said, ooh, that did not go very well. I have also had meetings recently where I left the meeting and I thought to myself, I did a nice job making sure that we could come to an understanding and an agreement and make sure that we move forward. And so self-awareness is, how do you really feel about the situation? This work that we do is really hard. It's challenging. It's also super rewarding. I would say that if we're not encountering challenges along the way, then maybe we need to push a little bit harder or move a little bit more forward, because the work that we do when we're asking people to maybe think differently or behave differently can be very, very challenging. And so knowing how you feel in the moment of what's happening is really important. I know that when I started to have conversations with my staff about doing inclusive work and having students be a meaningful part of general education rosters and classrooms, some of those conversations were really easy. They're like, yes, great, let's do this. Some of them were not so easy. But knowing how I was reacting and how I was feeling in this situation really helped me have more of the challenging conversations. Self-management is a really good tool when you think about being in an IEP meeting, for example, and your ability to engage with multiple stakeholders and showing that you're in agreement, that you are positively engaging, that you're asking questions. Social awareness is understanding the dynamics of the situation in which you're in. And relationship management, this is really what we do all day, every day as leaders and as educators, managing relationships between similar people, different people, but making sure that we're doing a good job at that. And so this is a framework that I really think about when I, as a leader. What I also didn't tell you is I recently got my doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania, and I did a lot of research and work around emotional intelligence and principles and different special education structures. And so what I will tell you from the data that I learned is that people notice emotional intelligence, and they notice different types of emotional intelligence depending on the special education structure. If you're interested in talking about that, I can do that at a different time. But I did want to let you know that there is research around some of these concepts. And then the last part that I would say, when you think about emotional intelligence and school culture, there's also non-negotiables. And when I think of my non-negotiables, when I arrived at Foster City School, I came back and I realized, like, this isn't okay. This has to change. We are going to be an inclusive place. We are going to be an inclusive school, and I'm going to figure out how to support my community and my staff and my teachers and my families in order to move in this direction and continue to move the work forward. But for me, and I would encourage you to think about, what are some non-negotiables for you as a leader? When people know what your non-negotiables are, and they approach you with, yes, I know we're doing inclusive work. I had a conversation and got some feedback with the LCAP and the site plan that we've had in the past couple weeks. And some feedback was, I know we need to work on our mindset. I'm really glad that we're moving towards the direction of inclusive practices. I need more support with training, for example. And so this really permeates and becomes a part of the culture. And as a leader, we have a lot more power and influence than I think sometimes we give ourselves credit for. And so what I'm going to share with you next is about gratitude. Lainey Roel is the speaker that I had met a couple weeks ago. She was the one that had shared that video about the sticky note. She talks about how gratitude, we need to make sure that we're giving it 6 to 1. There's different ratios of how much, if you give some negative feedback or some constructive feedback, then how often would you give the positive feedback? She'll say 6 to 1. I would offer to you, once you give it, you'll get it. And making it a part of your practice is really, really important. And then there's also this idea that we are biologically trained to see the bad. And what does that mean? That means that we are in survival mode or protective mode. And so our brains, it's really easy to see things that maybe aren't going so well. And what I would encourage us as leaders and as an educational community is to figure out how to continue to see the good. I stop and I think, and before I gave this presentation, I was like, I'm really proud of the work we've done, but we're not fully inclusive like maybe some other places. We're still on that journey, but I'm going to share it because I think it's good. And I'm going to share it with my staff when I'm talking with people in the hallways, when I'm at staff meetings and giving specific feedback about some of the great things that are going on. It's really, really important to find the good and share the good. And then this is some data for you. This is our recent California Healthy Kids Survey. It's not perfect, but in general, the data is telling us that this is a positive community and a positive place. All right. We're going to go on to how to build collaborative teams. These are some numbers. I'm not sure if you want to drop in the chat how many hours of meetings you've been in or conversations that you've had, but in this school year, I've been in myself, I have one assistant principal. Between us, we've had about 25 SST meetings, 42 504 meetings, 87 IEP meetings since August. And so we are spending a lot of our time in meetings, and a lot can happen in meetings in terms of collaboration and support. I'm going to share with you another statistic. Is when our team at school, after our multi-tiered systems of support process or our care team process has recommended, and our interventions have recommended a child to be evaluated because perhaps there's something else going on that we do not know, 91% of the students were eligible and 9% were recommended for 504s. So over the last several years, we've really made sure that we are assessing students where there's significant concerns that are happening, that we're not just assessing any child because we think that maybe there's something that is quote unquote wrong with them and we need to figure out. That wasn't necessarily the case when I got here. When I got here, it was often that this child has a learning disability or something going on, I can't figure it out. And so really through the process of teamwork and understanding how to have conversations and put systems in place, we've made sure that when our school psychologist is doing an assessment, there really is a warranted concern. Okay. I also want to offer you that when we have conversations with the other adults on campus, they can be challenging. And I want to offer to you a framework that's called flux pedagogy and this idea of brave spaces. It comes from, she was one of my professors at the University of Pennsylvania, Dr. Sharon Ravitch. She does a lot of amazing work. If you Google her, I would recommend it. And I'm going to offer you a piece of this. We often think about when we are having meetings with people and when we are creating teams and the challenging conversations that I mentioned earlier, people have sometimes said this idea of safe spaces. And what Dr. Ravitch offers is really we're trying to have brave space conversations and naming that the conversation we are going to have is brave. So for example, when I spoke with my staff and said, hey, we're moving in the direction of being more inclusive, we're thinking about students that are going to be spending more time in general education classrooms. There were brave space conversations because there was a lot of fear of the unknown or fear of what might happen. And so I would offer to you guys to think about shifting language from safe to brave. We're prioritizing honesty, acknowledging that it's discomfort. Oftentimes I would say, I know this is challenging, I know this is uncomfortable, but we're going to get through it. Being vulnerable as leaders and understanding that maybe we don't always have all of the answers. And then just really working through some of the other things in terms about what safety is and preparing for these things. And so in the resources that I shared, there's a link to her article about flux pedagogy. She also has a book that had recently come out in the last year or so that talks about flux pedagogy as leadership. And so when we think about having brave space conversations, we also want to think about who, what, where, when, why, and how are you having a group of people come together to support your initiatives and creating inclusive environments. We did a lot of plan, do, study, act model. So we would plan, we would try it, we would study if it worked, and then we would make adjustments and iterations as it came. On our campus, we have very clear times for meetings and we adhere to them. So we have a care team meeting, something that we have instilled the last few years. We have a meeting at once a week on Tuesdays. And at this meeting is myself, our assistant principal. We have a school psychologist. We have our school counselor. We have a BCBA support person that is also working at our site. And so all of us, and we also have a mental health clinician and a social worker in our district that attends the meetings as often as they can. But it's really important that when we came to a care team, the care team meeting was not necessarily just for students with mental health and then had a different meeting about academics. Something that we changed differently is when our teachers have concerns about particular students, for example, they submit one form that comes to our team, and every week we're reviewing and seeing students that need support. Something else that we have here on campus is an instructional leadership team. And the instructional leadership team was solidified over the last 2 years, but it was really focusing on instructions and students. Sometimes instructional leadership teams I've been a part of had wanted to focus more on maybe like the logistics of Halloween, for example. But at these meetings, we really made sure that we created the space and had a brave space conversation that we're going to be talking about our students and their learning. We have our PBIS team. We have a Best Buddies / inclusion team. I think the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about Best Buddies. And what I would say for these teams is working with your school district is important depending upon your site funds and what is available. But sometimes we had to have sub coverage to meet with people during the day. We also were able to meet with people a little bit longer in the afternoons, and we compensated them on a time card. So acknowledging that every school site and every school district has different regulations and rules to follow, but really being intentional in how you're planning this and you're building it from the beginning to support the inclusive work. So Best Buddies, I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with Best Buddies. It's a great organization. I've known about Best Buddies since college. I participated in this program. I also participated in Special Olympics and worked with people with disabilities and played basketball together. And so what Best Buddies is, it's an organization and they create meaningful friendships. In our elementary school, it looks like a friendship club. And so this was another team that came together. Our teachers have a budget and funding associated with it. Every other Tuesday, they come together, 1st through 5th grade. TK has some other things that are going on as well. And really an opportunity to create fun spaces for students with all different abilities to come together. So that's a picture of Best Buddies in action in our library. All right, this is I'm sure you guys know this, but I feel like anytime someone reminds me, it's really true. Planning for next year, we've already thought about planning how we're going to be doing things next year. Schedule all the meetings. So from the very beginning of the year, we put all of the meetings on the calendar. We put all of our IEP meetings on the calendar. We have our 504 days. We have all of our maybe SSTs that we still have, but making sure that it's on the calendar and building a master calendar for your whole school and writing it down. So some of the goals in which you'd like to accomplish at your school, it's important to talk about it with your team, write it down, and you can hold yourselves accountable for all of this. Okay. So what we're going to talk about next is how to create cohesive systems. Systems are really important at a school. There's lots of things that need to happen behind the scenes in order for it to function every day. And so I'm going to share with you a little bit how I've built some cohesive systems here at Foster City School. I also want to acknowledge again that it's not just our classroom teachers, it's everybody around in our community that help make our place very inclusive. So we have everyone from our school office, to our classrooms, to our families, to our school district, all in support of creating spaces in which students feel included and feel like they belong. And everybody as part of the system has to understand what the goal is and where we're moving. And so an example would be is sometimes we have students with higher needs. All of my office staff knows them, is very warm and friendly with them, and understands that they have maybe some differences and need some support than some of our other students. And so when we think about when we think about where we want to go, I want to share with you something that I have implemented as a framework to think about successful change. I know that in my work, I really want to make sure that we can move things in a positive direction, but I also need support in thinking about, okay, well, how are we going to get there and how should I think about change? So what's the goal? So when I got to Foster City School, my goal was to not have students be segregated, was to have students meaningfully included as part of their general education and special education programs, to have staff think differently and to behave differently. And when I mean that, for example, is I have staff coming to me now a couple weeks ago and said, hey, we're going to try co-teaching. Great, right? And so really, what is the goal? You want to start with what is the goal? And then thinking about how did I get here? And there are, in this framework, there's 8 keys to making change work, and there are 8 levers of change. And so you have your organization, and I'll walk through these for you in a second. You have your workplace, you have your tasks, you have your people, rewards, measurement, information, decision allocation. If you have the opportunity to click and force a copy, you're able to make notes on your computer if you'd like, to kind of go through this exercise of thinking about what's my goal and how am I going to get there. An example, it can be as big as we're creating an inclusive school, to something that is not so big as at our school, we wanted to make sure that all teachers read particular books every single month that are correlated to the themes of the month, which sounds maybe easier, but when you think about the logistics of how to support people in making a change, our leadership team walked through an exercise of some of the changes we had to make as a staff in order for our goal to be met. So we have our different levers. We have, as I mentioned, here's the table. And so in your handout, you should have access to some of this information. And if you'd like to take notes, if you want to think of a goal, we're going to go through it together. And I'm going to share some of the things that I have done in order to create some more inclusive environments here at Foster City School. Here's the thing that is with this theory, and I appreciate it. It says, if you don't commit to changing 4 things, don't do it. And it's like, okay, well, as a leader, as a principal, as a teacher in the classroom, there's all these millions of things that I'd like to change and make better. But having this framework really grounded me in thinking about, okay, if this is really what I want to do, I have to commit to at least changing 4 of the practices and the protocols or the procedures to see the change through. And it's helpful because the Gregory O'Shea, who's the author of this, really says, if you don't want to do 4 things, do not say that you're going to change something. It won't work. Okay. So the first one is thinking about the organization. This is actually a picture of some of our teachers recently this year that have decided to do co-teaching. But when you think about the structure, so the vertical chain of command and how things are, the organizational chart, for example, something that we changed a little bit in terms of the organization, which I would say is we really started to think about all of our special education teachers on staff as educational specialists and case managers. I understand there's, in our district, there's like the SDC language, which I would like to change all of that. But when we started to think about people as case managers and being responsible for all students, it allowed people to have much greater collaboration across the board. So that would be one example of language that we've done and how we've thought about organization things changing, and people that are responsible for different projects. I really thought Best Buddies was a great idea. And fortunately, other staff at my school did as well, but they became in charge of it. And they were the ones that were going to tell all of us how it was going to work versus me having to take on that responsibility. The second part would be workplace design. So how do you actually think about how your schools or your classrooms are set up? If you recall, when I walked onto campus a few years ago, our special day classroom students were in the back of the school in the corner. That sends a really clear message. We have as I mentioned, we have a large school, we have a large campus. And so when you come into campus and our different specialists want to know, how do I support my special education students? And we say, oh, you have to go all the way to the back. It's not great. And so we changed it. So over the last couple of years, we moved classrooms. We've had brave space conversations. And so now our students with special education needs and differences are in the center of our campus. And that also sends a message to our community and to our teachers that we're prioritizing students with maybe some of our most vulnerable students with more needs. They now have bathrooms in there. So it was something that occurred over the last couple of years. Could also think about how your classrooms are designed in general, just the layout of them, and the access to various different types of furniture. So how are we going to change things? The tasks. So what I will say about this is over the last several months or year or so, thinking about what I have done to support the work I want to do. And an example would be is the next phase was we wanted to make sure that we were changing how our paraeducators were receiving supports. And so we built it into the schedule to make sure that we could meet with them twice a month and supported that work with our BCBA. But what I will also tell you is AI has completely transformed education. And I'm not sure if I'll have lots of time to talk about it today, but AI in terms of being a thought partner has helped me tremendously in how I figure out the workload and the protocol and the pathways and the processes. Something else to think about is the people. So you have people on your site that are allies. You have people on your site that want to do the good, that want to find the good. And I would encourage you to lean into those people and really empower them. And so thinking about who they're going to be in order to support this work. I'll also say, though, that through our school district, which has been tremendously supportive of inclusive practices, partnering with our special education department to have them understand the shifts that we were making here was really, really important. I wasn't doing this in isolation, but in conjunction of them knowing changes that we've made on site in order to have our students have being meaningfully included. Okay, thinking about rewards. So you could change how you acknowledge the rewards and how you acknowledge what is happening. Maybe it's that at every staff meeting, you're shifting to having the opportunity to acknowledge all of the good in terms of inclusive practices that are happening at school. Or you're walking into your classrooms and giving very specific feedback around how teachers and staff are engaging with students that need additional supports, for example. So how are you as a leader changing your orientation to support? Okay. Then the metrics. So sometimes I've heard the argument, well, what about the other kids? Like, are they going to, like, how is this going to affect them? The good news is there's data. And so this is an example from this year in terms of all of our kindergarten data. In short, the darker blue bubble is good. And so from fall to winter, you can see that in general, our kindergarten students have exceeded. And what I will say is that all of our kindergarten students have been included over 75% of their day. And so people that might say, hey, this isn't good for other kids, you have data to support what you're measuring, that's not true. Okay. Then you're thinking about your information, your distribution, who knows what, when, and how. It's an example would be is when we created more inclusive spaces at Foster City School, I made sure to work very closely with my office staff and my enrollment department and understand the students who were maybe on different rosters and change that so that my front office staff understands that this is a priority and that they continually think about students that in the past were marginalized and put onto different lists, for example. Okay. And so when we distributed this information and when we plan for these things, we plan now with our class list, as I mentioned previously, you plan now for the future. And I'll admit that a couple of years ago, we had our students with more needs, or what you would call your SDC students. We would come back in the fall and then we would have to think about, oh, what classrooms and which kids and where are they going to be? And so sometimes they wouldn't even get into general education for the first couple weeks of school. I'm not, it's not something I'm proud of, but it was the reality of what was happening. And so we shifted it. And so when our teachers are making class lists and when they're thinking about where students are going to spend the majority of their day, they are included in everything from the rosters, from the email communication that goes home to families, from the collaboration that happens between general and special education families. But that was a system and a change that we had to think about in terms of like how we're giving this information and when. This was the book that I had referred to in terms of flux leadership. And so who participates when, in what, and in which decision. And this might be contrary to how other leaders might lead at their school, but it was really important that the non-negotiable for me was, hey, we're doing inclusion here. This is happening. And I am going to figure out how to support you to get there. Is it going to be easy? No. Is it going to be challenging? Probably. Is it going to be worth it and rewarding? 100%. But the decision is, how are we going to do this? What looks best? What are some ideas that we have? It isn't necessarily, are we going to do this or are we not? And when you, as a leader, make those decisions that don't seem really hard, but sometimes you encounter places and spaces where it feels harder than it should, I think it's important to think about, you are giving people some information about what's going on, and then depending upon how you're figuring out their input. And so we have our special education team that collaborates with general education teachers that are coming to me, as I mentioned, the co-teaching, right? That came from them, great, but it's all along the lines of where we are going. And what I will say, another example is next year we are opening preschool at Foster City School. We will have a special education preschool, and we will also have a general education preschool. And the conversation is, okay, how are we going to make this work here at our site? Not like, can we have this or can we not? So really just encouraging you all to think about the decisions and who participates and when and what way. So I think we're okay on time, but this is just, again, the 8 different ways to think about how to create sustainable change. I would encourage you to, start big if you want, but then also start with concrete things and thinking about the systems at your site that can change. And the big thing is you have to change at least 4. If you don't change at least 4, don't do it. Which is, sometimes it's hard to like, wait, really? Yes, do not do it. Otherwise, you're going to be more upset that the things didn't work. But if you're going to change things, think about changing at least 4. I gave you examples of how I changed other things along the way, but changing at least 4 is really, really important. Okay, I think I have a couple, I'm gonna do one more slide and then I was gonna stop the presentation and take some questions and open it up for dialogue or have people have an opportunity to share some things that have been really successful at their site. And so the thing that I will say, AI and principling, as I call it, I would offer for you to think about AI as a thought partner. It's a tool, and I would really encourage you to be using it. As I mentioned, I've been able to create trainings for all of my staff in a way that allowed me to pull data and resources from different platforms and different knowledge, and then be able to do something that I've been thinking about wanting to do for 3 years, and I was able to do it and make it work. From a communication standpoint, when I have to send communications out to people, using it again as a tool. There's lots of different platforms around it. I'm not going to get into too much of that today, but I would just really encourage you to think about all of that. And then, so today we talked about emotional intelligence and the connection to school culture. We talked about some ways to build collaborative teams. And then we also talked about how to create some cohesive systems. And with that, I have this is my cell, and if you have any questions or want to thought partner with anything, please feel free to reach out to me. And then I have a form for feedback and connecting with me on LinkedIn. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop sharing. That's okay with you all. And then have an opportunity to look at the chat. And great. Yeah, I'll drop the slides, but I just wanted to open it up to see if you have questions, and I can start to answer them in the chat. If that's okay with you all. So, okay. Do I have an inclusion specialist? No, we did not have an inclusion specialist at our school. Some might say it would be myself and my team, but I think it's really important that when I embarked on this journey, it's like, yes, I'm the principal. Yes, this is what we're doing, but also having people along the way to build your team of supports. Are there other questions? And if you wanted to unmute, I think that's fine too. I'm happy to.
Yes, anybody who would like to ask questions or make comments, you're free to unmute yourselves. You're also free to raise your hand, use the raise hand feature, and we'll keep an eye out. And it looks like Heather Williams has her hand raised. Go ahead, Heather.
Hi, Heather. Oh, you're on mute.
How many times a day do we do that? I have a question for you.
Yeah.
I noticed something that stood out for me that you said is that you have the meetings with the paraeducators twice a month. How did you do that logistically with different overlapping schedules and things like that? How did you make that work?
So again, building it, right? And really thinking about it. I acknowledge that other places have union different things and times, but we have time on our Wednesdays afternoons that it's basically time. And so I'm able to schedule that with our paraeducator staff. And I put it in the calendar, so it's marked off, right? It repeats, so that when anyone else tries to schedule something with me, it's like I'm booked and I'm busy, right? You cannot get me at that time. But really planning and thinking about it and having the flexibility with our schedule. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. There was the concerns from general education teachers. I think that my experience would say, well, first, I do a lot of emotional intelligence work. I do a lot of, thinking about how I'm feeling about things. For me, inclusive work and special education is equity work. And so I've done trainings with my staff when we think about what equity is and what it looks like. But I also want to say that I, as a leader, while it's uncomfortable for me to have brave space conversations, I have to figure out how to do it. And that either where it's role playing with people, calling them in and saying, hey, tell me more, what's going on. There was one of the students in one of the slides a couple years ago. It was challenging. We had just come back from the pandemic. He's a student with autism. He was having a really hard time at school, for lack of a better word. It was really hard. I met with a teacher a lot. I listened to her. I figured out how to get supports. I gave some suggestions on shows I like to watch on TV. I don't know if you've seen Love on the Spectrum, right? Just different things that allowed her to have different perspectives. But I didn't allow well, he can't be in my classroom conversation to happen. Fast forward, he's doing great. He used to have a full-time behavior team. He does not have a behavior team anymore. We often talk about it was a hard year, but that idea of that sticky note, right? You don't really get to see your impact the whole time. I often come back to her. It's been a couple years later, and she's like, "He's just doing so great. I'm just so proud of him." So how do I deal with it? I think you kind of have to figure out how you want to, and you have to do it, which is easier said than done, I acknowledge. I've done trainings before about nonviolent communication, and that's just like a form of how you talk to people to understand their fears and their needs. So that's something that's been helpful.
We also have a question in the Q&A, and it's from Rusty Gordon, and he asks, how is this being received across the district at other sites, other principals, the union? Seems to be an initiative that should be district-wide.
Yeah, it is a district-wide initiative. So we do have we're actually partnering with SIP in a lot of the things that we are doing. And we have focus schools that we are rolling out. How it's being received across the district. I think in general, I think people want to do the right thing, and I think people are doing the best that they can. It's just how do we support them through it, acknowledging that change is going to be different. I had a meeting this week with my TKK team saying, hey, preschool is coming. I know this is going to be different. It's going to be a change. We have to move some classrooms. But if I know anything about you guys, is we're going to work together to figure this out. So in terms of that, it's moving, but I don't want to say that there aren't barriers along the way. I think the other part I would say, I think he asked leaders and principals. Did he say that? I don't know if I can see okay. So I think that for myself, I don't have a background. I mean, I have a doctorate that talks about special education, but I didn't have a background in special education. And I think sometimes there is an assumption that in order to be a really great leader is you have to know everything about special education, or you have to have taught special education. And I would assert that's not the case. I think you have to be a person that cares about kids and wants to see things differently, and then figuring out a way to teach and learn. So I'm a principal, and I also have I do some consulting on additionally as well. And I've led principals through training specifically around navigating special education and using AI and really giving them some tools, because, no one really trained me. I figured this out. And I often wonder how we can support leaders that are doing a lot of the on the ground work. They don't get a break, right? So that's something else that I do as well. Other questions?
As we give everybody just a couple of minutes to think things through and see if there are any other questions, I just want to say thank you so much for being here and for this presentation. It's been amazing. Thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you for our interpreters and our Spanish translators who have been with us this whole time. I did drop a link to our conference survey, so make sure that you provide your feedback if you'd like. And we are inviting you, after this session is over, to have another live dance session with DJ B Diamond during our lunch break. And then please come back and join us for our closing keynote this afternoon with Alicia Anderson. It's going to be amazing, as has everything been so far. So thank you again, Dr. Goll, for being here with us. We can pause and take some time for any additional questions that might come through. Or you are all invited to begin your lunch a little bit early today. Thank you for being here, everyone.